always going to see you this way. The white man's not my God, so I don't care.
Well, if as a Christian, the white man is a Christian's God. Give me Amos 3:1. Let me show you this, Jason. Let me show you this. You said you don't care what nobody thinks about you, which is valid, because we could get called Negro or all day. Nobody cares. In Amos 3:1, watch what the Lord says. So the Lord says, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. As a Christian, we have been lied to consistently. God deals with everybody, but God says, you only have I known of all the families of the earth, and therefore I will punish you. Colonialism, apartheid, segregation. That's what it's always been about. The sins of the children of Israel, who we are. And this is why we suffer. And no pastor, no preacher, no imam has taught our people why we as a people have suffered, Jason, why we went into slavery, and what we must do to be delivered from oppression, from slavery. No.
I think obedience to God is the solution. I don't think we're the only group of people that suffered the destruction of slavery. That slavery has impacted all people who have been inhabit. The ancestors of everybody at some point were enslaved.
Like who? Like who?
You name the group. Italians, who you name the group, and their ancestors have been enslaved.
Oh, you said Italians. Okay. The Italians were the ancient Romans that assassinated Christ, that destroyed the nation of Israel in 70 AD. Were they enslaved? Nope. No, they were not enslaved. Who else, Jason? Give me another name. Who else?
You're saying no Romans were ever enslaved?
As a nation, as a race, as a people. No. Only us. Only us.
Hold for 1 second. You said no, or you say no Roman. Now you're saying as a people, only us. There were free black people in America and free black people all over the globe. Mm-hmm. And what happened? Everybody wasn't enslaved. That goes for America. There were black people in America who owned slaves.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second, Jason. The free blacks that were here from the time of the 13th colony, what eventually happened to them? Their lands were taken, and many of them were lynched, burned alive. Okay, now when I talk about slavery biblically, not just talking about slave ships, yokes of iron on your neck, I'm talking about loss of identity. That's a big one. Loss of heritage and culture.
I want to give all the praises and the honor to YAHAWAH, BaHa, YAHAWASHI, BaHa, RAWCHAA, QADASH, and double honors to the elder apostles and even the elder bishops of Great Millstone. Salute and honors to you other elders, you brethren, you fellow believers of this faith. And shalom to the hopefully elect, shalom to the elect, peace to you. We got to be careful of this word that we see called slavery, or to be a slave, right? Although there's many denominations or many levels to this word slavery, right? And so this man, his name is Jason Whitlock, and he says the same thing that, and I'm responding off of his video, you know, he says the same thing that so-called every other so-called black person has said, right? But the people in the Holy Land, they consider what so-called happened to them not to be taken lightly. All other nations considered to them not to be taken lightly. Why? Because they had a lot of reparations. But we were the only people that didn't get that. And then we're going to kind of go into the fact that there's different levels of slavery, titled, right? You can even go back, he said, in the ancient times, yes, you had people in slavery. Israelites had slaves. It just means servants, right? So, I mean, you had different forms of slavery, different kinds of slavery. legitimate slavery, right? Then you had what you call tortured slavery, is what we received. It's a total different kind of slavery that we received. And it's probably shouldn't even be called that, because the nature of it and what, and what came out of that kind of slavery. Let me see here. The different kinds of slavery you had chattel slavery. Let me see if you have the other ones. They have quite a few lists of them. Which chattel slavery means a slavery in the most common form of slavery known to Americans, right? This system, which allowed people considered legal property, right, to be bought, sold, and owned forever, and was lawful and supported by the United States and European powers from the 16th and 18th century. So we can clearly say, well, yeah, this happened to other people, not this, but other nations went into slavery. You have nations that went up and nations went down. Everybody was always owned, right, to some degree. The world was made for the Israelites' sake. So if the Israelites had other nations in slavery, it was totally legitimate, especially knowing that we're going to handle it legitimately by what the Most High said to do, right? But this kind of slavery, being brought over, lynched, whipped, tortured, you can even say going with the Romans, they had the torture devices, but what did they say? They say they don't even hang their own. You had Israelites, back then going through these forms of torture, man. Starving, torture, suffering. Of course, there's different kind of slaveries. Then you had our people that may even look like other nations who went through a form of slavery. He said the Italians, you had the Sicilians, you had so-called blacks who had them in the form of slaves as well. But this is different. This is something uniquely different, or just grossly different, right? Let's look up this word torture. Torture means a contortion, twisting, and distortion. This is in the online etymology. Disorder characterized by contortion. Isn't that what happened when we was born on those slave ships? I can't understand how we still make the excuse of the torture that we went through and compare it to so-called other people's, misfortunes, right? I can't understand that. If we stop calling it slavery and call it a form of sickness of torture, it would make more sense of how a young woman would have a child and you would snatch the baby away. And now they have no problem giving them away or going to the parent place, right? So we can see the product of slavery. And when you look at the product of slavery, you look at us as a people and see how far it's gone, right? And that curse from the Lord. Remember David, you talk about the 3 curses. He said, I want to choose the curse of the Lord. Other people got cursed, but we got the sure enough Lord's curse, man. Jeremiah 17:4. And thou even thyself shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in a land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. Now this man Jason Whitlock says, well, you had black slave owners, which was true. And some of them was tares. Some of them was when they raped the black woman, the baby grew up, and they put them in charge of some of these ministries, some of these like boule type of, systems or whatever, where they had them ruling over. And you had some so-called Israelites who was, found fond of the owners. But you better not still get out of line with somebody else, right? So you had some privileges. Just like athletes today have a different kind of form of privilege than the average person, even over whites, some whites. So we get the point. But the key is, if we're the children of Israel and we're God's chosen people, Doesn't matter what slavery anybody else went through. The only slavery that matters is what the Israelites went through. And the Lord showed his hand in slavery. Why? Because Exodus 15:3 said the Lord is a man of war, number one. So his thoughts, as Isaiah 55 say, his thoughts ain't your thoughts or our thoughts. So the whole point is there's a big, big difference in these forms of slaveries. Right? Let me look here and see if I see any more. I know there was some more differences between these so-called slaveries. Now, when you look at this, I don't think I have the picture up, but I'm going to read this. It's called Slavery Today. And it's showing you the different, how slaveries have evolved, right? They got one called sex trafficking, forced labor, bonded slavery, child labor, forced marriages. And what you see today, they call it forced marriages, is a slavery too. That's what they call it. So as you see it today, they call forced labor, they call that slavery too, as what you see happening. So you got modern day slavery, you got several types of slaveries, right? You had the other one, they called it, as I went into earlier, there's so many different sites. Now there's 6 types of slaveries. You see how it never ends? The history of the slave trade, they consider that in the 16th and the 19th century, and in Egypt, right? And so this was the Israelites, going back to 70 AD. So when you see this in Deuteronomy 28, here we go, forced labor, debt bondage, you got to pay your taxes, descendant-based slavery, slavery of children, forced in early marriage. There was arranged marriages, which was traditional. Slavery. But you know who fit all these? Mostly the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the bondage. This is what we all went through at once. Many slaveries, right? Executions. Now they're setting Jacob to get entrapped, to get these being executed, right? They get them locked up so they can do forced labor. So you got to understand there's many different forms of slaveries and there's different levels. But there's no slavery that ever compared to the children of Israel's slavery. That's another level of slavery. Let's go to Amos 3:2, which the bishop quoted, Bishop Nathaniel of the IUIC, says, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities." The reason why I also want to go in this, because Bishop Nathaniel doesn't, he's really not going into deep waters and giving a full understanding of slavery, especially amongst the nationalities, with some of these nationalities that look white are actually Israelites. But you can't, like the Italians, not all Italians are white people, right? Some people who claim to be Italians are Israelites. He said they were Roman. Well, guess what? Apostle Paul was a Roman, considered himself a Roman citizen. We know they were Edomites, but you had our people calling themselves that. You got to put that out there, that the Israelites, even with the white skin, some of them never escaped of sure enough curses. Some of them got the better of the curse, right? Because we have been scattered throughout the lands. The Native Americans came here. They got the curse. So it's all kind of weird doctrines going on now, saying that the blacks was already here and they was picked up and then taken across the waters, the slavery. Well, that's true in a sense. You had Native Americans that looked like so-called Negroes. They were taken too. But it's all kind of weird doctrines. Understanding slavery. Slavery, again, goes on many levels. It has different dynamics, twists and turns, right? They want to call it the white slave trade, where they stopped boats, pirates, and took white women and sold them and did certain things. But as a nation of people, it's kind of sick that all this has happened to us, that it would be downplayed to as is almost like everybody else form of slavery. No big deal. Well, you know what? Somebody does 100 years in prison, somebody else do 2. You go and tell them, well, you know what? We did time in prison. There's no way your 2 years would compare to somebody's 80 years in prison. Your 2 years ain't gonna compare to somebody's 10 years in prison. Good behavior, you're out in a year. So this that happened to us cannot be compared to any other slavery on the planet. And I don't understand why people are comparing what happened to us to anything else. Even them people in that land that claim that's what happened. You can't even compare that. Millions and millions of us slaughtered. And the outcome of slavery, of what's happening to us today, right? Of looking at the woman, looking at the curses, looking at the young men. Let me say the men, then the woman. Look at the curses. Look at the struggles. Look at how Eve, the woman, is put up way over men. You're going to tell me that hasn't, you can't see a broken people when it comes to that? Anyway, Job 34:29, when he giveth quietus, who then can make trouble? And when he hideth his face, who then can behold him? Whether it be done against a nation or against a man only. So you had the sub-Saharan slave trade, right? Ships, or however they did it, right? That was going back and forth. But what happened to the children of Israel? Then you had the Arabs who was set up as slave traders. And a white man came and got us, sold us. Other nations sold us. You get the point. Hundreds of years, millions of us destroyed. Millions of our families destroyed. And the outcome of our destruction still shines and shows today. With no reparations, so to speak. No 40 acres and mules or whatever else. Straight lied to, treated like trash. And now you're nothing but entertainment, being still traded back and forth through sports. The next trade, standing up on the block. And your mama will say it's all right. Which in these conditions, if you can be an athlete and you made some money, then so be it, you know. But which is still showing you that what is happening now is still happening. 1 Samuel 2 and 7. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and he lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill. You know why our slavery was so much worse? Because we're the children of Israel. The Lord loves his children. And the more you love, the more you push and punish. Because you expect better. Right? At the end of the day, the Lord set it up for us to really appreciate the kingdom that's coming. Right? He lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill and set them among princes. Well, this is an example here, Job 30 and 5. They were driven forth from among men. They cried after they cried after them as after a thief, to dwelleth in the clefts of the valleys, in the caves of the earth, and in the rocks. This is where you get the term cave, the cavity from. Holes of the rocks. So again, the hell that we endured and still enduring to this day as the Most High's people is why we're still able to endure it and why we're still here today. And proving that we must be the children of Israel, because any hard punishment that came from the Lord was not easy. Got news for you. Some of our people are mixed, sprinkled in amongst the so-called Amalekites, man. You know? We're sprinkled amongst all nations. Some of them that Chinese railroad and what they had to endure certain things, guess what? You had Israelites amongst them too. No, the Israelites didn't escape the curse as a nation. That's why I said whether it be done against a nation or an individual. Again, I can't understand why our slavery is being compared to other watered down versions of slavery. Well, let me say not watered down, just slavery. When we went through something far more to the highest level of slavery, the highest level of pain and torture and mental stress. Can you imagine somebody snatching your wife and putting her with another Jake, taking your baby and selling them somewhere else? That's what Job 3:3 says. They had given a boy for a harlot and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. This is why it's here, because it was the hardest slavery. Deuteronomy 28:48, saying we would go have yokes of irons upon our neck. There is no comparison. That's all I have on that. Shalom.